Hey everybody, welcome to Minding the Key Store. This is the YouTube channel that talks all things public key infrastructure, all things PKI. As always, I am Brian Roma, your shopkeeper, where we're going to talk some shop and some maintenance items. So February kicks off a theme surrounding what can you do to better take care of the public key infrastructure that you have built and in place. PKI and Active Directory Certificate Services are things that live in production for long periods of time. We're going to talk about offline root CAs today, and those can be in play for 15 years, 25 years, 30 years, 50 years. Your offline root could be out there supporting your production infrastructure. So you need to have a plan in place to make sure that it is working as expected, and that you're taking good care of it, so you don't end up in a situation where you've got an outage. Now you have to migrate to new public key infrastructure, because that could be a sad day. So for those of you that are new to the channel or new to the stream, welcome. We're glad that you're here. We're going to spend the entire month talking about these kinds of tasks for different portions of Active Directory Certificate Services, the root, the issuing CAs, curl distribution points, and so on. So if you're new to the channel, I'd love to hear what kinds of maintenance practices you have in place. Let us know in the chat. What kinds of things do you do on a regular basis, and how often? Whether that's backing up a given certificate server, or how often do you apply updates? How often do you check to make sure cert services are running? Do you have something that you use to monitor and manage your certificate services instances? I'd love to hear. What are you doing to keep things, alive and working well? And then how do you know if it's working okay, right? Okay, so welcome to the chat. Welcome to the stream. I'm going to jump right into it. Let me pull as always, I've got limited screen real estate, so I'm going to pull my production software down for just a second. So if you've got a question that you're going to drop in the chat on YouTube, it might be just a minute before I get things maximized again to be able to see it. So fear not, we'll get back to that, but I'm going to minimize that so I can share. And I'm going to cut over to this. So I've got a couple of articles that I want to share with you. Let me cut to this. One of these is a blog post that Mark Cooper at PKI Solutions put together, which is a standing list of things that you should do for your offline root certificate authority, or your offline CA. I often call it the ORCA. People use different acronyms. OCA, I've seen that as well. What do you need to do to take care of your offline root certificate authority? And I'll put this in the show notes for you to take a look at. It's from 2016, but the buckets of tasks that Mark is talking about in this particular article are still really valid, first of all, and second of all, a good jumping off point. There's some additional things that I'd like to add to what Mark put here. He's largely focusing on things within cert services. But there are adjacent technologies that we should consider as we work with certificate services. Actually, you know what? Let's jump out for just a minute. Let me come back to me for just a second. So when you're talking about an offline root certificate authority, typically speaking, your offline root it's physically separated. It's, people will say it's air gapped, meaning it's in a separate room. It's highly secured. There's very strict logging and auditing about who can go in and use it, right? Because the role of the offline root certificate authority is to be a trust anchor, right? It provides the means to authorize other things in your certificate chain to issue certificates. So basically the root CA has the keys to the kingdom to say you can be an issuing certificate authority, and then those issuing CAs put certs out in play for things like secure Wi-Fi communication, or file encryption, or disk encryption, or mail encryption, or code signing certificates, or getting an application working, something like Intune, and using something like an Endes instance with Microsoft Intune and O365, or Microsoft 365, I think they're calling it now. They've rebranded. So that root CA, it's really critical that root certificate authority is maintained and kept truly separated. So making it a virtual machine that's in your production environment that can be just turned on and accessed by general help desk folks. You might trust your staff, and we all work with great people. But what happens if that root virtual machine gets deleted and whatever Veeam hasn't run, or you don't have a fallback position, and or it becomes a lot more difficult for someone to, if it's been air gapped, if somebody decided that they wanted to spin up a rogue certificate authority and start authorizing applications on your behalf, it's a lot more difficult if you're paying closer attention to that root CA. So we're going to talk about some of the things that Mark has in this blog post, but exactly how often do you do this, when during the year, and how often do you do these kinds of things? As we have said at PKI Solutions often, and we mentioned here on Minding the Key Story, the answer is it depends. It depends on what's in your policy and your practice statement documentation, if you've drafted those and put those together. Very often when it comes to root certificate authorities, the maintenance actions that you might perform on your root CA depends on how long your root CA certificate revocation list, or CRL or CRIL, is valid. So if your root CA CRIL is valid for a year, very often these kinds of things would happen in some proximity to that process of getting a new CRL issued and securely transported across that air-gapped environment to where you could get it onto your CRIL distribution points, your online CRIL distribution points for your production environment, so that your issuing CAs and stuff like that continue to work as advertised. So what might make sense, this is just me brainstorming, and if you're not sure, don't take this as carte blanche recommendation for across the board, but if you're not sure, certainly reach out to PKI Solutions. We have a professional services team that can help advise you for your specific circumstances. But what might make sense would be to go through the process of updating and reissuing that new CRL for your root CA. And then once that's done and you know that you've updated it for your production environment during that same change window, then follow up with some of these things that we've got Mark talking about. If you do it in that order, then if there's a major issue and you're trying to troubleshoot things with your root, you're not updating drivers or service packs or HSM, supporting technologies, and then you reach an outage with your root CA, and then your CRIL is going to expire in 2 days, right? So maybe get the CRL updated, get it transported to your production environment, make sure that that's good to go, and then go through some of these kinds of steps as a part two. Let me real quick. Let me check and see if we got anybody that has any specific questions. Nothing specific so far, which is totally cool. Let me cut back over to my desktop share. So Mark has got this blog post. What do we need to do for an offline root CA? This is a good read overall, and I'm not going to read this word for word. All of you can read. That's great. This focuses, so this is a great jumping off point. This focuses on within the Windows ecosystem, things that you should consider. So many IT environments, and there is value in making sure that you don't, like, if it, as the vernacular, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's true, but you want to maintain your root CA to the place where it continues to be supported by Microsoft, from their official support capacity, as well as it's compatible with whatever infrastructure you've got your root certificate authority interacting with. And we'll talk about some of those other pieces. So as Mark mentions here, Windows Service Packs, super important. You should be securely transporting service packs. Now, do you want to open up traffic from your root certificate authority out to the internet across that air gap? Probably not. What you probably want to do, and I just realized I still have some music chiming here in the background. Let me pull this down just a little bit further. What you might want to do is, use that same transport process that you have put together with, specifically identified encrypted USB devices or something like that, encrypted drives that are scrubbed by multiple layers of antivirus and are audited heavily. That process that you would use to get the CRIL out from your root CA secure enclave, you might use that same process to bring Windows updates in transport and get supported service packs installed. So don't ignore getting critical updates on the operating system of your root CA just because it's air-gapped and nobody wants to touch it because it's super critical. You want to make sure that it's updated to the place where if you had an issue and you had to open up a ticket with Microsoft, or you're working with a TAM or whatever that is, if you've got a severity 1 outage, you don't want them to come right back and say, well, this isn't supported, what you've got. Update to the latest version and then call us back in a couple of hours, right? Stay on top of it. And then, number 2 that he talks about is ADCS specific hotfixes. And PKI Solutions has a hot list of specific hotfixes related to certificate services. So, kind of goes without saying, you want to make sure the thing that the server's in place for, in this case, it's going to be a standalone because it's a root CA and you don't want it added to Active Directory. It's a workgroup system. It's a standalone certificate authority. It has cert services running on it. You want to make sure that ADCS hotfixes. Now, this isn't, in my opinion, this hasn't been in play as much. We certainly saw this quite a bit in around Y2K through, the early 2000s, where daylight savings changes didn't automatically, even though the OS was supposed to update date and time, it didn't always do that, and it created issues with logging or applications running properly. But it's a good idea to stay on top of that, right? Because so much of Active Directory and Active Directory certificate services, and even with an offline root, so much is critical that everything is time-stamped properly and you have the right time associated with the system time, as opposed to what time your HSM sees the appropriate time, and so on. Everything needs to be in that same window in order for certificate services to work properly, or at a minimum for you to narrow down if there's a problem. So staying on top of that. Antivirus. Mark talks about this a little bit. Why would I want to have antivirus on the system? It's air-gapped, and that's certainly true. But we recommend I'm just reading through. I saw the when. Mark talks about the when here. We recommend that you put antivirus solution on the root certificate authority, and he makes a use case for that. And he talks about when. We covered the what. We now talk about when. The easy answer is okay. So he's just saying what we said. Yeah. Thought he was talking about a different window for doing antivirus updates. So, getting virus definitions, getting the software installed on the offline root, and then getting virus definitions installed at whatever your maintenance window is for the CRL would be a good idea. So, maybe you get a definition roll up for the 12-month window. You get the latest def from, Symantec Antivirus or whatever, Carbon Black, whatever it is that you're using. And that runs on that given system. Again, securely transporting, I wouldn't recommend necessarily just opening things up to the internet for your root. Finding a secure way to transport and screen things that are coming in and going out, and definitely auditing everything that comes in and goes out. So if you have a compliance situation and you're working with an auditor, you can show them this is how we make sure no malicious code comes in and gets onto this machine, and servers start impersonating our certificate authorities. So there's an article that Microsoft has in here that talks about, and this goes back a ways. I mean, you can see it talks about Server 2003, but the interesting part, so the tasks are largely the same. So for the offline CA, and this talks through the steps, and I can link to this as well if you're not familiar with this. You would manually publish a new certificate revocation list. You can also run a command. Now this is, you can see this is an older version of OS. The GUI looks a little bit different, but it's the same. It's the same process. You can either go to the certificate services management service console and go through this process. Right click, tasks, publish. That's one way to do it. Or there's a certutil command where you can, if you need to publish that particular curl to Active Directory, there's a certutil command that you can run after this has been published and transported from that secure environment. So let me cut back to me real quick. Let's see if anybody has any thoughts or questions. We're doing good so far. Everybody seems to be following along just great. And great to have everybody on the stream. Thank you so much. Now, in addition to, I want to make sure that my operating system is up to date. I want to make sure certificate services has been updated as Microsoft releases updates for a root CA that's been out in production for 20 years or 30 years, or you may very well reach the end of support for a given operating system, right? And you have to. There's a process you have to think through about migrating to a new OS and what that looks like, and we have guides and services that we can walk you through for that. So not only do we have the operating system itself, certificate services, you should consider things like antivirus, things that are adjacent to this machine running properly should be considered as well. So if this particular server is a virtual machine, and we can talk through risks and what you're comfortable, what level of risk you're willing to take on. Many environments will not build a root certificate authority that's a virtual machine. They're too easy to delete. They're too easy to export and put it on a drive and walk out of your secure building. So they may not go there at all. It depends on what risk you're willing to take on. But let's say that you do have a root that's a Hyper-V or a VMware ESXi guest. Anything that involves that particular machine functioning the way it's supposed to. So things like VMware tools or drivers or updates for updating virtual machine revisions so that a server continues to function properly within Hyper-V or within VMware's ecosystem. You should consider making sure that those are up to date as well. And any kinds of dependencies on hardware that the system has, you should think about maintaining at some interval, an annual basis at least. And the one that I would say is most notable is if you have a hardware security module that this system has been integrated with, and there are drivers, hotfixes, updates that the HSM vendor has released, especially if it's in relation to the OS that your root certificate authority is running on, you should consider going through an upgrade process and making sure that your Luna client has the hotfix for the given version of Windows Server 2016 as an example. It's something that I've seen in production environments where we had issues with Adcs not installing properly because our Luna client didn't have a hotfix. We were running on 2016. We even found that it was an issue with older versions of Windows. We had to install a hotfix on our system after getting the Luna client installed. So things like staying on top of things like that are really important because hopefully if you are not directly responsible for the HSM, you're in decent communication with your HSM management team, and they should have a plan in place to do things like upgrade the firmware and do regular maintenance on your HSMs and security worlds or partitions, making sure that they're healthy and up to date as well. So let me jump back and take a look here. See if anybody has any other thoughts or comments along the way. So make sure, definitely want to get on the latest and greatest version of the OS that Microsoft supports. You want to make sure certificate services are up to date. You want to make sure that you have things like antivirus in place and you're updating those on a regular basis. Anything that the machine relies on in order to live, so if that's virtualization software or drivers, to either talk to things like an HSM or stay healthy as a physical machine, you want to make sure those are up to date as well. And how often do we do this? That's a really good question. It depends. So do you do that, every 6 months? Do you do it once a year? And do you do it when you do your regular curl release, or do you swing it? I've seen some environments talk about doing that opposite of when they do their curl release. So mid-cycle. So one time of the year they go through the production outage of or the production impact of updating the CRL and publishing that from the root and getting that out into your active enterprise, and then 6 months later then going through some of these other regular maintenance items. So that really depends on what you're comfortable doing and like how your change control environment works. Pardon me. So I'd love to hear, and it's great to see everybody in the chats. It's pretty active. We see several people that are jumping on and watching. So welcome to the channel, welcome to the stream. I'd love to hear in the comments the kinds of things that you are doing as a part of your maintenance cycle for your root certificate authority. Are you using Windows as your root CA? And if so, what kind, how well does this align? Are you doing these things with your offline root CA? And how often is that happening? Are you doing that monthly? Is that once every 5 years? Is it I'm not touching it ever again, which happens sometimes. I'd love to hear in the comments. So we're going to continue talking through maintenance items. What can you do on a regular basis to make sure that your ADCS environment is working properly? And then how can you check and make sure that it's healthy? Those are both really good questions. We're going to talk through the rest of the month and kind of work our way through the ADCS stack of technologies. So good to see everybody. I hope you have an amazing Tuesday, or maybe it's Wednesday, depending on which part of the globe you're watching this from. And I will see you all very soon.